All right, guys, we've got about a minute left. Let's see. We've got about a minute left before we get started here. So while we're waiting, I just want to issue a quick call out. If anybody wants to volunteer where they're calling in from or where they're joining us from in the chat, I'm always really interested to hear how wide our audience reaches on any given event. So please feel free to drop that in the box. The other thing you can do is if you have anything, any subjects or anything you'd like to learn on future Chat and Learns, maybe people that you're really interested in hearing from, different positions you want to hear about from company members that are partner clients or partner companies, just feel free to call that out. We are trying to build out our Chat and Learn schedule through the rest of the summer, and we want to make sure that we are bringing you all content you want. We want to make sure that any time that you spend with PowerToFly is well worth it. So please feel free to drop that in chat. Oh my gosh, we got people from Turkey, Chicago, Minneapolis, Colorado. Very nice. Very, very cool. I'm super jealous of everybody that's living in Chicago right now. Your mayor is kicking butt as far as the social outreach goes. Whoever's running her social media accounts, I would love to talk to and just completely fangirl over them. All right, Vermont, Mexico, very cool. All right, so it's 3:01. I'm going to hit record here and we are going to get started. All right, so happy Wednesday. It's the afternoon. We're on the downside of this day. We're on the downside of the week. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us and spending time with us this afternoon. So for anybody who doesn't know, my name is Meg. I'm part of the marketing team here at PoweredFly. And I am super excited to host today's Chat and Learn and really dig into this subject with Colleen about engaging communities. So I've got a couple of housekeeping things we'll go over real fast, and then we'll get right into today's discussion. So first things first, today is all about you. It's all about our community members, and your participation is key. So to that end, feel free to turn on cameras if you like. I know I, for one, very highly value seeing new faces now more than ever. So you're more than welcome to turn on your cameras if you like. If you don't want to, totally understood. And we very much encourage everybody who wants to come off mute to ask any questions that might occur to you, address questions to Colleen, either about relativity or about her subject that she's speaking on today. You can also write in the chat if maybe you are someplace where it's a little bit louder, you don't want to come off mute to ask, you're more than welcome. And if you want your question raised anonymously, then feel free to put it in the Zoom chat and just direct it to me. You can pick me from the drop-down menu as opposed to sending it to everyone. That being said, best practices are that if you're not actively speaking, try and keep yourself on mute. I will be doing the same, so that way, like I said, my bulldogs don't give into some noise pollution and cause problems for everybody else listening. And we try not to crosstalk or overtalk if anybody else is already speaking. It can be difficult with computers and lag time and whatever, but we just do our best. Quick reminder that today is being recorded. So if you registered, regardless of whether or not you're able to attend, or if maybe you're joining us for a couple minutes, but you have to jump early. Everybody that registered today will get an email with a rewatch link when the video is posted to our PowerToFly page. And we're also doing YouTube streaming right now, so the recording will be available there sooner rather than later. And then the last thing to call out, we've got some slides that Colleen's going to explain, give you guys a little bit of an intro to Relativity as a company. But once we get past those, the questions that were pre-submitted for today's chat have been organized into what we try to organize it into kind of a conversational format. So those will be listed later, and we'll do, we've got 2 pages of what the questions are going to be, so that way you can take a screenshot in case you're not sure if a question that you've thought of might already be on our list to be asked, or if you have a question that might fit in nicely in a certain grouping of questions, then when to raise your question to Colleen or to myself. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you all to Colleen Costello. Colleen is the head of social impact at Relativity, which is a Chicago-based software company. In this role, Colleen is responsible for the strategic design and implementation of Relativity's corporate social responsibility programming. Prior to Relativity, Colleen was the director of development at Teach for America of St. Louis. She began her career as a middle and high school teacher and is passionate about education, technology, and workforce development. So welcome, Colleen.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to virtually be here with so many people.
Yeah, very exciting. Now, I know we have a couple slides for you to go over, but before we get to those, I just want to call out the fact that you can follow Relativity on PowerToFly. I'm going to put the link to their page in the Zoom chat so everybody can check them out. Following them, clicking that follow button on Relativity's page is a really good way to stay updated when they have upcoming events like today's Chat and Learn. It's also a good way to stay informed of if new roles are posted, or one of the best things is if you go to Relativity's page and don't see something that suits you, following Relativity on PoweredFly puts you on their follow network, which means that you are putting your profile kind of head and shoulders above a lot of people that they might look at for certain roles. And it helps make sure that that your profile is seen, and it communicates to Relativity that you are super interested in them as a company. So always a good thing to do. And the best part is it doesn't clutter up your newsfeed or your inbox. So if you're interested in the company, I always recommend that you follow them. So Colleen, you were going to tell us a little bit more about Relativity. So I'll give you the floor. You let me know when you'd like me to change slides.
Great. Yeah, I thought this would give a little context to what I'll be talking about today. So Relativity is an e-discovery software platform. The E, as you can imagine, stands for electronic, and discovery is part of the litigation process. So we support legal discovery, investigations, government requests such as Freedom of Information Act, and really a lot more as we continue to grow. We really bring that whole process together in a single solution. So it's both on-premise and in the cloud. I saw a few people from Chicago. Thanks so much. We are headquartered in Chicago, but we're a global company. We have offices in London, Krakow, Hong Kong, and Melbourne, and we are over 1,100 people strong right now. So we might be a place that you haven't heard of, but we've got 180,000 platform users. So lots of people using the software to do really important work. And we actually have 80+ development partners that are actually developing solutions on top of Relativity through our open API. In terms of how much kind of content we deal with, this chart, so it's a little bit outdated, but from the end of last year, we had 125 billion with a B files under management at any given time. So lots of what I call kind of the data dust cloud out there, and that's a little bit about what we do as our business. If you want to switch to the next slide. And if you don't remember anything about that, I think our mission statement is great. I love it, and it's nice and simple. It's organize data, discover the truth, and act on it. Organize data, discover the truth, and act on it. It's what we help our clients do, and it's certainly what we aspire to in our day-to-days as individuals within the organization. If you could hit the next slide. And we'll be talking about community today, and certainly I'm going to get into this in a lot more detail with some of the great questions that have been submitted, but I wanted to give this visual because we really think about community in a three-pronged approach, but these three prongs are not separate at all. They're completely united. So at the center is our team, what we call Relativians, as we refer to ourselves, those 1,100 people around the globe that make our product and our community tick. And then the next layer of our community is our users. We have a really active user community. People are like fans of the software. There are some people that really live and breathe professionally in this platform, and it helps them solve a lot of problems. So our user community is just an amazing group of people who I've come to know and love. And then I always say, what's outside of our four walls, kind of our virtual four walls now, our local communities. How do we ensure that we're being a really good neighbor? How do we ensure that we are adding value to the communities we're in? How do we ensure that we're really crossing that divide between those four, or now digital, four walls of our offices? So again, we'll talk a lot more about our views on community, but wanted to give this visual to get us started.
All right, so thank you so much, Colleen. Oh, we got one more page.
Yeah, and then last, I'll be talking about this a little bit more, but we're using a lot of social media to engage with our community, and so you can follow us on those platforms, including make sure to follow us on PowerToFly. But as I'm talking about some of these things, I do want to share that this has evolved a lot over the years, and some lo-fi ways to engage are still the best. So an example I'll give is our Gives Tea Tuesday. Last year we decided we just wanted a way to better connect all the people doing great things in our offices and kind of have a celebration day. So the first Tuesday of every month is Gives Tea Tuesday, and it literally is, you wear your t-shirt, you take a selfie, we have a theme, We post it on some of our internal channels, and it's just a great way to very lo-fi build community.
I love that idea. That's so cool.
Yeah, we've had a lot of fun with it, and it's certainly translated well to the current times.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. All right. So before we dig into the questions, this is what I called out earlier. If you're curious about what questions are coming up, please feel free to take a screenshot here. I'm going to stay on this page for another couple seconds, then I'll flip to our second page of questions. If you don't want to take a screenshot, you don't have to. It's literally just for people that maybe didn't submit a question in advance, or if you have any kind of curiosity about which questions we're going to be trying to address today. I'm going to switch to the next slide now. This will give you an idea of maybe if you have a question that is not represented on this list right now, where it might fit in with our discussion. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to flip to our first slide and get us started. So, Colleen, can you tell us about how and why the community impact programs were started at Relativity?
Yeah, I would love to. So when our founder, Andrew Saja, really started to grow this company and really realized it was going somewhere, we were actually called Kcura at the time, and we were probably just a couple hundred people. There were three things that he wanted to be true. Number one, he wanted us to have a market leading product, which I think is really essential. If you're going to be doing anything good for the community from a business perspective, at a baseline, you have to have a really good business. So a good product. Want it to be a great place to work. We often say whether you work at Relativity for 2 years or 20 years, we hope you have fun and meet a lot of great people. And the third thing is he wanted to level the playing field. And for us at that time, it meant level the playing field for kids using technology. Being in a city like Chicago, working in our zip code downtown, you could drive just 20 minutes. And there were kids that at the time were literally learning how to keyboard on cardboard boxes. And that was just astounding and horrifying to the people that kind of realized that juxtaposition between our really high-tech, high-growth company and just a few zip codes away on the south side in Englewood, the kids literally didn't have access to the most basic things needed to be a part of today's digital society. So that was kind of the first piece. And then I always love to tell people about how really organically this all started. Over the years, we had a number of people that just said, hey, like I know this school or I know this teacher, and could we do something? Could we connect with them? Could we donate old computers? Could we support them during the holidays? And a lot of these things, someone just raising their hand and saying, hey, I know a need in the community. Do you think we could work together to help solve it? Is really what evolved into Relativity Gives and now our social impact programs today.
That's so awesome. And it's honestly one of those things where no matter where it starts, it's always good, right? Because you're trying for that social outreach and that social impact. But finding something like this that grows really organically that's special. That's amazing.
Yeah, it takes a lot of cultivation and a lot of hard work. I've always liked kind of the analogy. It's one that people use when they talk about culture in organizations. And if you take milk and you cultivate it, it can be turned into yogurt or cheese. And if you just let it do nothing, it turns into mold. And so, it's one of these things that like at a baseline, really good. We've got kind of the milk. And if you cultivate it, you can turn it into something even better, something more evolved. But it does take some of that time and care, even in the organic process.
That's a really good call out. And I feel like something that's definitely worth highlighting and focusing on is that people love to talk about kind of that organic growth of communities. And they love the gardening metaphors and things like that. But like, what you see in nature, like real, natural, untamed nature, is not at all what you see in a garden. So the idea that people look at a garden and see natural beauty is lovely, but it's kind of oxymoronic because there's a lot of work that goes into what seems effortless, right?
I have lots of dead plants in my house. So yes, I completely agree.
Yeah, houseplant murderer, like serial killer.
Exactly.
Bad. Yeah. All right. So for our next question, this person wanted to know, how do you encourage organizations to look at the social impact on a community in addition to their bottom line?
Yeah, this is huge. And I will start off by saying I have been lucky that I've never really had to do any convincing at any of the organizations I've worked with. It's really come pretty naturally as sort of a, well, of course, to our leaders. But I think the thing I'll say to this is that social impact on the community is and should be part of the bottom line. And so there's a couple ways I think you can get that across. Number one, and taking this from my days in development, data and storytelling go a really long way. So what does this mean specifically for your community? I spent a lot of time in St. Louis where the school system really struggled. And a lot of things I talked about with my corporate partners was, if you're looking to bring another 1,000 people to relocate to St. Louis, if they don't feel good about how the school system is, about how the community is, are they going to want to come choose to live here and be part of your company here? And that can be a really hard answer. So data and storytelling, really good, but there's actually just a lot of research out there that proves this is good for the bottom line if that's what your executives and your leaders are after. There was a study that looked at the 100 best places to work from like the mid 80s to the early 2010s, so about 30 years. And they looked at all of those 100 best places to work for those 30 years. And in that time, they found that those places had between about like a 2.5 to an almost 4% higher stock return, which is huge. If you think of $1 billion company, and a lot of the companies on that list are probably much more than $1 billion. If I'm like moving the zeros right, that's I think 40 million on 4%. So there's a huge impact on the bottom line. Other studies, I took some classes with Boston College through their Center for Corporate Citizenship, which is a really data-driven organization, showed that if you have both good social impact programs and an efficient operation. So again, kind of going back to that baseline of you really have to have a well-run company for any of this to work, but you're going to have less stock volatility, you're going to have less risk of bankruptcy, you're going to have a higher firm market value. So all of these things really are part of the bottom line. And think about things like employer brand. How do you attract talent? How do you retain them? Lots of people, but especially millennials and Gen Z, really want to work for organizations that does something above and beyond just the baseline making money. It mitigates some risks if you're doing the right thing. There's kind of a trust bank account that occurs. I think it allows a lot of efficiency and innovation. It certainly helps your brand and reputation. We're going through difficult times right now, and you'll probably see a lot on social media of like the way a company responds during this crisis is their brand for the next 10 years. A lot of our communities are in crisis on a daily basis. And so the way that we respond to those things as organization also becomes part of our brand. So definitely there is research out there on this topic. Those are a few of the kind of high level things that I always like to talk to people about in terms of how it is in fact part of the bottom line. But you know your executives, your leaders the most, and kind of what levers you have to pull to be able to really encourage them that this is important. So definitely go out there and find some of that good research on specifically maybe what their pain points are.
That's a really good way to put it too, because it's really easy to say, well, make it matter to them. We find out what matters to these people, to your decision makers, and make this personal or make this apply to them. But I feel like it's a lot more true and all-encompassing to say, talk about data and storytelling, because generally people respond to one or the other, and if you hit them with the 1-2 punch of both, you've kind of used your time to the fullest.
Exactly, definitely.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to our next question here. How do you build a community? I know this is incredibly open-ended. So if whoever submitted this question wants to bring a little bit more detail to it, I highly encourage you to either drop a line to me in the chat, come off mute to bring some more detail to this question. But as it's presented, Colleen, how would you start to tackle this iceberg?
Yeah, so I think the way I'll answer this is we all do this every day. Like we are all experts in community because we are all part of communities. And I had a laugh the other day in realizing that even from a really young age, kids start to do this for better or worse. I have a 2.5-year-old niece named Grace. She has two aunts, myself and my sister Erin, and we are both married. And she was sort of like drawing pictures, and she organized. She said, "This is my family. And my parents' dog made it into the family. I made it into the family. My sister Erin made it into the family." But then she put her uncles, Tom and Jim, and friends. So she has these kind of like separate views of communities. So I thought that was really interesting that even from a young age, we're able to kind of sort people. But in terms of building community, it really comes down to what are our common interests? What do we have in common? Where are those differences, and how do we use those differences to our advantage and really celebrate those differences? And from there, I think building community is like building really any relationship. It has to be founded on trust. There has to be mutual respect. Those can look different across different types of communities, different cultures, but at a baseline, I think really wherever you go in the world, if you were to say this is my community and you really mean it, you really feel like you're part of it, those things are true. Trust, mutual respect, something in common, and certainly celebrating differences.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, and a really good point is that, you can kind of build that community wherever you are. It's just the steps you take to get there might look slightly different depending on, maybe your specific industry or the size of the community you're trying to create. And especially like you said, that trust is key. And so outlining what you're going to deliver to somebody and then following through on it, it's a really good way to kind of cookie cutter break down these things that sound like really nebulous and kind of intangible ideas and make them into concrete steps that you can take and action things that you can do.
Yeah, I think I would encourage people, if they're thinking about, how they're going to build or grow their community, like think about the places where they feel really good about the community that they have built or grown, because everyone has, and kind of backwards reverse engineer that of what had to be true about that and what needs to be true about a different type of community that you're building as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is more of a personal question for you. Could you shed some light on how you made the transition from a usually slow-paced nonprofit space to a fast-paced technology-based industry?
Sure. My experience in the nonprofit was actually that it was incredibly fast-paced, both in kind of time and the quantity of work. So I will start with that I had a slightly different experience than the person that asked this question. But the technology space is also incredibly fast-paced. So I guess a little bit of the history behind that. I had worked for Teach America in development. I had also been a teacher with the organization. In college, I studied international business at a Jesuit university. And so we actually talked about corporate social responsibility in all of my classes. And I really loved that I was making that connection through development and fundraising for kids and communities that I loved and cared about. But I was looking to get back to Chicago. My family is all here. My sisters were getting married and starting to have kids. And I decided that, if I'm going to make a switch, maybe now is time to do it. Frankly, I got a little bit lucky. At the time when the role was open, they were specifically looking for someone that had education experience and nonprofit experience. So I was kind of that strange candidate that fit the bill. But in terms of making the transition, I think number one, I had to be just really confident in my skills and what I could bring to the table. Number two, I had to do a lot of translating. So I always talk to a lot of teachers that might be thinking about transitioning out of the classroom or how they could use skills in a different way. And so the common example I give is teaching at its core is project management. I taught high school students. I had about 200 of them, and they were 200 little different projects that all had different goals that needed to be met. I had students in high school that were reading at a kindergarten or a pre-literacy level, all the way up to post-college, and they all had to achieve the same goals in the same amount of time. So lots of project management practices used there. So how do we translate what we do? As a development person, at your core, you're a salesperson. You have a lot of the exact same skills. You might be even using something like Salesforce. You know how to build pipelines. You know how to build relationships. You might know how to write proposals. So being able to really translate the things that you did in the nonprofit space to transition. And then once I did arrive in the tech space, I just had to be open to learning. Things were done differently. The language was different. I definitely felt like a student again, where I had to ask questions, and I was rarely the most informed person in the room. So a bit of humility in that regard went a long way.
Okay, thank you so much for detailing that. And that's a lot of what you say is really awesome, because we get a lot of questions about people transitioning from maybe one industry to another, or especially trying to translate the skills that they've developed in seemingly unrelated industries, and trying to how to communicate that to in the direction you're trying to go, or communicate that to hiring managers. So thank you for putting I'm not Englishing well today, but thank you for putting that really eloquently, and really, calling out how you can make that transition and call out and communicate how those skills will be applicable to your next role.
Yeah, and I would always just encourage people too, don't leave it up to fate, or don't leave the person who's reading your resume to figure out what those things are. If you have an opportunity to do a cover letter, do a cover letter and be really explicit about that translation. Do it for them. I just really wouldn't leave anything up to chance when you're trying to make a leap like that.
Yes, very good point. Okay, so for this next question, this is a little bit more broad again. What recommendations do you have for engaging with the community and driving impact during this time that we're all living in?
Yeah, that's a big one, and I have a few, and we're figuring this out, I think, just as everyone is. But the thing I think I've learned most is be really kind and patient with yourself and your community. Some of the organizations we work with almost 2 months into this crisis are really just starting to come up for air right now, past the true crisis and trauma of what's happened with communities, to even think about engaging with us. So acknowledging on our half and theirs that is fine. If you're engaging with the community, or you had been and you had maybe certain goals in mind, certain priorities, being willing to just say, all right, that was what we thought in January. It was truly a different world. What's true now? And how do we engage? And I think the biggest recommendation I have with this is have conversations with the people, the organizations, the leaders in your community, because driving impact can't just be coming from you or an organization. It really has to be pretty mutual in that regard. So yeah, the biggest things I'd say: patience, having just some love for yourself and the organizations you work with during this time, being okay with switching up the gears and taking a different direction, and working together, having some just very, very honest conversations about what's needed.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to call out, is the honest conversation bit, because we're all in this together and everybody's going through this for the first time, because pretty much nobody that's alive and really impacting anything in a major way was alive the last time a pandemic swept the planet. Exactly. So yeah, it's all unprecedented, whatever. But you're right in kind of approaching it with that two-pronged, this is unprecedented, but also we all navigate some variety of crisis multiple times throughout our lives, personally, throughout our professional lives. So yeah, it's kind of putting on the crisis hat, even though, it might not be, maybe it's a baseball hat and you wish it was a, windproof bucket hat or something, but, trying to get yourself back in that mindset. And you're right, like asking questions and calling things out and saying, hey, this is how I'm handling it. How are things going for you? Because it's it's an overarching theme that everybody's going through, but those responses and everybody's situation might look slightly different. And you don't do yourself any favors by assuming that everybody's situation does or even does not look like yours.
Definitely.
All right. So do you have any tips for breaking into the social impact space? Maybe if somebody's never worked in this field before, or even just kind of looking to dip their toes in?
Yes, I love talking with folks about this topic. So I think the advice I give to anyone looking to break into any space is network. Just network a ton. Right now, obviously, that's all done online, which is completely fine. I would make it known to people of, hey, I'm looking to get into this space in my community or in my industry. Who can I talk to? I've never had anyone say no to helping me get to a connection like that. So that's first and foremost, and I think that applies to really anything. Number two, it's really a pretty small space. I'm really thrilled that it's grown so much over the last couple of decades, and it's truly becoming a cornerstone for having a business in a lot of countries, but especially in the US, is ensuring that we have social impact, or ESG, environmental social government, CSR, kind of whatever you want to call it. But I also like to tell people, if that doesn't exist in a company that you're interested in, be the one to start it. That's why I like to tell the story about how organically it happened at K-Cure at the time, now Relativity. You can either start it on your own, or maybe they don't have a formal practice and a formal role, similar to how Relativity didn't for a number of years, but you could be the volunteer leader. You can help develop these programs. You can really kind of forge your own path. Not only is that obviously going to be good for you, that you're helping to get yourself in a position to be able to take on a role like this when it would become available, but number two, it's helping the people in your company. And if you're doing it well, it's helping the community. So definitely, if you don't see something out there, if you're frustrated that the roles are not becoming available, find an organization that's aligned to your values, that's open to engaging employees in the communities in new ways. And on top of your day job, be the person that goes ahead and starts that.
That's a really good way to think of it. You're right. In terms of, what kind of opportunities can I create for myself, even if there's not a framework in place already at your place of business. No, that's a good way of thinking about it. And actually, it's very similar to some of the things that we were talking about yesterday on a chat about management, about how you can gain kind of leadership and management experience even without the title or without changing roles, by doing these kinds of things, being proactive and asking the questions of, hey, I see we don't have anything in this area. Is there a reason behind that? Would it be okay if I started to spearhead something? Like, asking the question is, you're starting from a place of no to begin with, because if you don't ask, you'll never know. So the answer is already
Exactly.
So if you don't ask, there's no chance for a different answer. So you might as well.
I love that. That's great.
I stole it from yesterday's speaker. I'm definitely going to use it a lot more. All right. So from your opinion, Colleen, is it more easy or more difficult to harness a community during a time of crisis or upheaval like this?
That's a good and difficult question. I'm going to cop out and say it's both. And what I mean by that is, I think in times of crisis, people can really come together. You have something common. Maybe if you didn't have something in common before, certainly this pandemic, in a lot of very unfortunate ways, has been a great equalizer, in the ways that it also has been a great unequalizer. That it's really drawn some big gaps between folks. So I think in that way, you can harness it because we're all going through something together. I had to keep reminding myself when we were having some challenges of, how are we going to do this programming, or we have to cancel this event, of this is not just a Relativity problem. This is not just a Chicago problem. This is not just a US problem. Like, this is truly a problem we are all going through. And so we'll all figure it out. So I would say it's easy in that regard, but I think it is. It's really inherently difficult. Times are tough for a lot of people. I just had a call today that, sometimes the best ways to make people feel engaged are to not ask them to do literally anything else. We have a lot of people that are caring for family members that might have to work different hours, and to see something pop up on their calendar that looks like it would be a lot of fun, and to know that they're going to have to decline it, could actually make them feel worse than maybe just even not having that engagement opportunity. So I think we have to be really cognizant of what we're asking of our community. We have to be going back to just really clearly communicating with people and having open lines of conversation, which can be hard, and being willing to do things very differently than we would have just a couple of months ago.
Yeah, I feel like we're all kind of stuck in a somewhat of a repetition of, well, that's not how we used to do it. But then we have to keep forcing ourselves and remembering, okay, well, how we used to do it can't really be done right now.
Off the table.
And
yeah.
Assuming that at some point we have a, as some people have been calling it, like a return to normalcy, or we're going to go back to whatever. I keep trying to tell people that it's sort of like when the horseless carriage was released. You're not really ever going to go back to precisely what happened before then. Are there still people that ride horses today? Absolutely. However, you're in a horseless carriage world. There's no one ringing that bell. So let's move forward with what we have now, and how things need to work, and how they can work, and how things have changed, and what that opens up, for new opportunities that maybe we didn't have 3-4 months ago.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to think about it. I know personally, I think I've been forced to be creative in ways that I just didn't have to be creative before. And so in that way, that's, maybe one of the benefits that comes out of this, is we're all being forced to think outside of the box.
Yeah, it's been helpful to me to think of it in terms of kind of a paradigm shift. And the thing that always, like the image that pops into my head when I think paradigm shift is a chick inside a newly hatched egg, right? So up until that egg cracks, that's the chick's world. It doesn't know anything different. That's the, the world that it's working in. But as soon as that egg cracks, there's no uncracking it and there's no getting back in the egg.
Right.
But here's where you have to go moving forward. So for me, that's the mental image that pops into my head every time I think about stuff like this. I'm
definitely going to steal that. That's a good one.
It's a good one, right? I got it from like some book I read a couple years ago. It was really interesting, but it had like small pictorials for things like that. We did have a question that was raised anonymously in the chat. It's slightly similar to something we already touched on, but it's got a couple details different. So I do want to run it past you before we get further away from that question.
Great.
This person had asked if you had any tips for how to go about gathering partners and buy-in to launch a social impact or volunteer program at their companies. So we talked a little bit about leveraging storytelling and data to make it matter to the company. But is there anything that could you talk to the idea of gathering partners or any kind of, like a consensus or other people that agree with you? And, there's always that safety in numbers and buddy system thing that tends to come to mind. Is that something that you would recommend if you're trying to spearhead something like this for the safety in numbers?
I mean, I think people know their organizations the best. I think my default would be to try to find an executive sponsor first. I think sometimes it could just be a little, I can only imagine being an executive and the types of like requests you get every day, and to have 30 or 40 or 50 employees saying, we want to do this, and you actually just need some time to think about how it can be done best. Doesn't mean you don't care, doesn't mean you want to do it, don't want to do it, doesn't mean it's a no. So I would try to find an executive sponsor first would typically be my recommendation. But from there, get some kind of anecdotal evidence from people. Is this something that other people would be interested in doing? If you can't find people that kind of sit around you or that share a common interest around this, and if they give you a green light and then it's just you that shows up to do the work, you're going to be a little bit rough. And then in terms of partners, it's really important, especially if you're picking partners to begin a program, I think internally or externally, that they're really a good fit. So I'd say don't be afraid to kind of interview people. Be really honest with them of, hey, this is something we're thinking about. I'm talking to a lot of people. I want to make sure that this is a good fit for you as an organization or as an individual, for me as an organization, as an individual. It's kind of like dating in that regard. If you want to date a few people and programs or partners to make sure it's the right fit. And as is probably going to be a theme of this, keep those open lines of communications. Be really clear about what that is and what you're looking for, so you can start off as strongly as possible.
That's a really good point to make. And one thing I do want to call out is that depending on the size of your organization, going it alone might not be the worst thing. Like if you don't have a lot of buy-in from other people, or if there's nobody else that really seems to want to volunteer to help you start this, that doesn't necessarily mean there's not a need for it, or that it couldn't be a good have good impact or be a force for good with your company. You just need to be like Colleen said, you need to be really realistic about the scope of what what you are planning and trying to accomplish, how heavy that load is going to be on you. And if you're the kind of person that's okay being the only person helping carry that load for however long. If you are, envisioning that once this kicks off, everybody will want to join and it's going to be great and everyone's going to participate and do their share, then obviously you've never been part of a group project before. But also, be realistic so that if no one else jumps on board, is this something that you're doing that's going to be kind of a sanity saver for you, or are you creating something that's going to eventually be more of a like kind of dead weight around your neck, and then you're going to feel guilty and blah, 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 all down that line?
Yeah, there are lots of ways to start small and pilot. Maybe it's within your team, maybe it's your department, maybe it's not going to be an org-wide thing. Maybe you actually do just get 10 people together and say, hey, I'm volunteering at XYZ place this weekend. I think you'd all be interested in helping, would you? And that's kind of what you report back of, hey, we're doing this already on the weekends. We could throw some corporate t-shirts on. We could make this part of something we do as an organization. I think there are lots of ways to go about it. Again, you know your organization best and what the best pathways are. But whatever it is, be really clear, find good partners, get a good sponsor, and don't be afraid to just start small, pilot, and try new things.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so what role, if any, do you see social media playing in the building and nurturing of a community? Are there any tools that you think are useful for that?
Yeah, so full disclaimer, I am not super active on social media. I think LinkedIn is like the one thing that I actually know how to use and use pretty frequently at this point. And I'm realizing I'm probably going to need to get up to speed on some of these other platforms. So my answer is I think it's going to play a huge role. I think it already does. At Relativity, we are on all of the social media platforms. We have an amazing social media team that makes it really easy for us as individuals and as people that are part of the Relativity community to engage. We have a community platform that people can create a login. And now that we're all dispersed, it really is the way to do it. So I don't have a specific tool of choice that I use. Our team does have a number of tools, and I think finding a tool that helps you. One of the things that I've noticed is a challenge. Obviously, we're all across different time zones. Even on this call today, certainly at Relativity in our community, we're in like 41 different countries. We have users. And so with that, we have to be asynchronous. We can't all be chatting and on the same calls all the time. So using some of those tools to post something at different times to be able to get feedback and get engagement, I think are really helpful. But yeah, if anyone in the chat has any suggestions for what they're finding the most useful for social media, I would love to learn from you.
So we did have a question from the chat. Kirsten says she's curious what the community platform that they log into is that you had just mentioned.
Yeah, so it's called the Relativity community. And if you go to relativity.com, I'm pretty sure everyone can create an account. That's where you'll find a lot of our educational materials. We've got message boards on there. People will ask questions if they're coming up with a technical difficulty. There's some celebrations on there sometimes. It's one of the many places that we share information about what's happening at Relativity as well. As I mentioned, it also connects to like our documentation, all of the great stuff that makes Relativity as a software, as a platform, and as a community tick.
No, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. I know from a PowerToFly standpoint, I mean, we use all of the major social platforms to help get word out. So LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook are basically where I spend the majority of my day.
Right.
So there's a lot of ways that you can engage. But then one of the things I did want to call out for anybody that's curious about the social media aspect of this is make sure, again, like I feel kind of like a naysayer, but make sure you're not biting off more than you can chew, because you don't want to say, oh, great, we're going to start platforms on all of these channels all at once. Like monitoring them does not take no time. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things that you think about how much time you spend on your own Instagram, and not only is it going to be you're going to think it's a lot lower than what it really is. But you don't want to create these communities only to watch them kind of languish like our houseplants that we were talking about. You want to make sure that you're creating something that you can take care of, which is very like, God, that's a really loaded sentence. I did not mean that to sound as heavy as it did, but yeah, like you want to be able to create these communities that you can help nurture and help grow, so that not only do these communities flourish and they do something great with social impact, but also so that the people that are part of them don't kind of feel forgotten. All right. Oh, thank you. Every so often I come up with a real gem. Okay, so to be more kind of dialed in, what questions do you ask to help identify or define community values?
Yeah, I guess I'll tackle that in two parts. So I think, I think community values and thinking about community values as core values, there's some really good exercises out there that you can just Google. When Relativity was defining our core values, which I would say are our community values, this was before I was part of the organization. I think we were maybe like 100, 150 people at the time. They literally printed out lists of words and went through and had people circle their top 50. And then they culled that down and then circled their top 20 and kind of gotten until it was, about 7 to 10 things that everyone agreed, like these are the core values of our community. I've done that as a personal exercise in a number of places. But I think the really important thing with that is the question, and if I'm going to say one question, it's what do you mean? And I say that because I think values are very cultural. And they can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So one of the best things Relativity did in terms of our core values was we actually attached actions to them. So when we say be hungry and stay humble, there's actually bullet points under that help describe that. A common thing I'll use to exemplify this is if you say, oh, strong communication is a community value that we all share. Well, in some communities and cultures, strong communication is that you're very forward, you're very direct verbally. In some cultures and some communities, being a good communicator actually means you take a back seat and you're a really good listener. So I think asking the question of what do you mean or what do you mean by that, what does that look like, will really help you drive home and truly figure out what are the actions, the orientations that truly exemplify those values.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good way of tackling what can be a really nebulous question, right? It can be all encompassing, and you're like, well, I mean, yes, we hold these values, but are they kind of of uppermost importance if you have to apply a hierarchy to them? So thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right. Do you use any systems to track what employees are interested in supporting?
Yes, we are pretty lo-fi in this regard, and it's basic survey tools that we use. Typically, a couple of times a year, we'll have some sort of event. It's normally like our volunteer fair. We'll ask people to complete a survey while they're there because it's pretty high traffic. So we'll gain some knowledge around that. With that, I will say that we do try to stay laser focused in our giving. As a technology company, we do think that we have a very specific lane that we can add value to the community in. And we do want to know what our employees are interested in supporting. So something that we're really thinking about for 2020 and beyond is, even though we have this laser focused program in terms of our community giving, our community engagement, our social impact, how do we empower people in their own time to recognize what's most important to them in their community? Because really no one knows the community needs better than the people who live there, and make sure that we can empower that as well. So it's really good data. It doesn't mean we're always going to do a 180 on the types of things that we support, but really good information to have an update. Again, part of a story that you might need to tell to decision makers, executives, as you may or may not be thinking about changes.
I totally like the idea of being kind of lo-fi with this tracking system is something that we also echo. I know that we have everything from I have scraps of paper on my desk of where people have suggested hey, why don't we do this kind of subject for an office hour session or something. Everything up through, I believe our most high-tech version we have right now is just a spreadsheet where people go in and they throw in their ideas. And that way we have a row or a couple cells of, this date from this person, this is the idea. And if you want to throw support behind it, throw an X on the line, and then we just tally up however many X's are, for each particular subject. That's how we started. We were doing something early in the quarantine called Fun Fash Fridays. And that's how we started it. Was I was like, okay, I don't have all the ideas, so give me a theme and, throw your support behind whatever other themes you like. And that's how we started picking them.
That's great. I'm gonna have to learn more about Fun Fash Fridays too.
Oh, it's on our Instagram. I think we're on a hiatus right now because people got a little burnt out. Plus our ideas were so awesome, but they were it kind of required a lot of prep. So yeah, we started it, and I think we're kind of giving everybody a breather right now. But yeah, it was just it's a very one of those things that you don't need to overthink, right? If you want to figure out how everybody has support behind something, you can run a simple poll. Or you can try and max out your technology if that's what you're into, but never discount the why can't I think of this? Like a show of hands. It's just that easy.
Exactly.
All right. So for this question, this person wants to know, how do you deliver difficult updates to a community? So this is prime don't shoot the messenger territory, but is there a method that you like to employ for dealing with situations like this where you have to deliver a difficult update?
Yeah, I've received a lot of guidance on this over the years. Our former chief people officer, Dory Blessoff, who used to be my boss, helped coach me through several difficult conversations. And I think approaching it with empathy and grace are two really, really important things. And that's, whether the community is like one person or your roommate or a large group of people. And I think employing, going beyond the golden rule of treat others how you want to be treated, but to the platinum rule of how do they want to be treated. And so take into consideration how, when, where you deliver those updates. You're never going to please everyone, especially if you're thinking of kind of a larger community. But I think I learned really pretty early on in my career that sometimes having these difficult conversations can be really powerful tools. We had a school that was on one of our large $250,000 technology grants. These grants are 3 years. They're milestone contingent, so you have to meet kind of your goals each year to get the next round of funding. And going into their third and final year of the grant, they just didn't meet the milestones. And so I was really nervous about this conversation. I did some role plays with a number of people. I literally lost sleep over having to tell this school that was already struggling in a lot of ways that they're not going to get these additional resources. And we did come up with kind of a third way for that, but they actually thanked me after we had that conversation and shared that no one had ever been that honest with them and no one had held them accountable in that way. And they were really grateful for it. As a public school, I think oftentimes a lot of public schools almost get ghosted if they're not doing well. They know something's wrong, something's wrong, other people know something's wrong, but people might not be talking about it. But just to have that conversation opened up a lot of pathway for us to work together to get them back on track and to continue to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to remember when you're having conversations like these is instead of framing it as, I have to deliver this really bad news, think of it in terms of how you would handle the situation in a relationship, like in a friendship with somebody, because when it's, members of your community, it's all about building and maintaining a relationship with them. And no matter what that looks like, it can be different depending on your situation, but nobody wants to chase down bad news. And it's always easier to deliver, especially unfortunate news, if you're coming from a place of, I really care about you, that's why I want to tell you this. Here's the way the situation stands. I would love to change it. Let's work and see what we can do to make, either change the situation going forward or not have to revisit this area or whatever. But you're right. If you are in a situation where you have to deliver difficult news, I feel like that's the best possible outcome, right? Is having somebody thank you for delivering it. But don't make them work for it. Don't hold things over their head. That transparency and that, kind of clearing of the air is huge.
Yeah, to be clear, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. I've had some very difficult conversations that end with people being upset or in tears. That certainly does happen. And I still think it's the right thing to do.
Oh, for sure. But that's the thing is, if you're handling it in a situation or handling it in a way that that you can be proud of the, method of delivery or how you phrased it or how tactful you were able to be, coming from that place of kindness and honesty is always a good place to start.
Definitely.
All right. So how do you weigh the importance of your internal community versus your external community when you are doing decision making?
Yeah, I think it would be easy to say both, and they're both equally weighted. I think I'm really lucky that there's a role like mine at Relativity that can be the voice of the external community or part of a voice. We actually have a lot of really amazing mechanisms. We have a great inclusion and diversity program. With that, we have community resource groups that represent a lot of different backgrounds of folks. And so we're always lucky to be able to have those voices included. So it would, in a perfect world, it would of course be 50-50. But I think I do have to go back to that idea of if your business is not doing well, you can't really do good for the community. So you really have to, on those kind of scales, you do have to put that somewhere as well. But if you're thinking about just making these decisions and it's internal versus external, I always like to think of a business as just sort of like a neighbor on the block. are you still being a good neighbor? Maybe you're not doing the exact thing you'd want to, or at the exact scale you'd want to, you wish you could help more, but are you still a good neighbor? And that should be the baseline that you operate off of. If your internal community is sort of like your housemates, and the external community are the people on your block, you have to still do right by both, even if it's not a distinct 50-50 split.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a very good way to look at it, is you can't continue to do good in your community if you don't have anything else to give. So yeah, like sort of the, what is her name? Jada Pinkett Smith talks about it a lot, about how you can't provide water if your own well is dry. So yeah, it's a good way to look at it.
And you have to be good to your people. You know, that's when you hear a lot with like social impact or CSR, that the ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and that social and the governance parts are really important to just at a base being a good business. No one wants to work for a company that treats their employees really poorly and is out making big grants or having volunteer days when you don't have the benefits and the support that you as someone on that internal team need. You really have to be very sincere, very honest in both of those endeavors.
Yeah. Okay, so we have 5 minutes left in today's chat. I want to make sure we get to all the questions that were asked, or at least I'm trying to. So if we only have time for one more question, I'm going to skip to this one. And then if we have time left, we can go back and revisit some of the others, or I'm more than happy to allow somebody else to get a word in edgewise. So for this question, how can small business owners utilize their community in authentic ways to help grow their business? I feel like this is an especially important question right now, because we're all thinking about things like our local restaurants or our local retail that maybe is not able to open up yet.
Yeah, so I myself have never been a small business owner, but I am a consumer of a lot of small business products and services. So I'll actually speak on that regard of some of the really amazing things I've seen lately in the Chicago community, certainly. And it goes back to, sometimes you just ask the question. I've seen some people on social media say, we can afford to be open 3 days a week. Poll, which 3 days should we be open? We're thinking about these 10 new services or products or meals to provide, which are the best ones. You know, in a time of crisis especially, you kind of don't have as much time to R&D things, and really going straight to the community and say, hey, I'm part of this community. I want to succeed so we can all succeed. Can you help give me some of that data to help me make informed decisions? I think, thinking about just the current times, that's definitely what I would recommend, what I see and what I really appreciate about the places. I think just something to think about too is you really have to be part of the community. You can't just reach out to the community and kind of like claim to be part of it when you need something. It's the same thing as we've talked about relationships. There's always that friend that's like popping in when they need something. You don't want to be that friend. So, it does have to be authentic. I think if you're making like a business plan of like, how do I pretend to be part of this community? Not going to be very, very successful. But think about it. How do you get out? How do you support other businesses? How do you celebrate the things going on in your community? How do you recognize when there is tragedy or trauma or pain? And how can you help the community get through that?
That's a really good thing to call out. And I hadn't thought about it from that perspective of like, well, if we can only afford to be open 3 days a week, help us pick which 3 days. Or I know that some of the places that I have really tried to help make sure that I support during this time, they've done a couple different things. One of the things I really enjoyed was them calling out and saying, hey, we don't have a patio, we can't open for takeout because reasons, blah, blah, blah. But if you want to buy gift cards during this time, here's what we can do. I know it's not a small business, but something that was also really interesting was Chick-fil-A is like a huge company, right? And to encourage people to use a service that is helping them maintain like wait times, that kind of thing. They want people to use their app. So they extended couple weeks there was like percentages off of certain prices for things, and then later they're doing something where like their loyalty points are doubled during this time as long as you use this app to order or something. So that might be something else that you can do as a small business is not only tell people how they can support you in this time if they would like to, but also make it kind of a tit for tat situation. If you can, do something like the reward points, or, buy a gift card, we'll throw an extra $5 on whatever price you paid for it or something. Like, it would, that there's a lot to be said about just that open communication with your community or with the people that support you.
Yeah, one of the coolest things I've seen, a couple of suburbs in Chicago, small businesses have gotten together, maybe 20 of them, and they've all donated, say, a $50 gift card, and then people could buy raffle tickets for $5 or $10. And I thought that was just such a win-win in a time when people could really use like something positive in their life. It's a pretty small amount, $5 to $10, and they could get thousands of dollars worth of gift certificates to use now or in the future. I think one of them I heard raised an average of like $5,000 or $6,000 per business for like a $50 gift card investment. So I think that's just a great way that was clearly authentic to them. They clearly had that community already, and being able to really capitalize on the fact that people do want to support the businesses and their communities. It helps make communities really vibrant and full.
And you know what, that really dovetails nicely into what you said earlier about kind of staying in your lane for things. So like, don't offer something that you can't deliver on, or that's outside your wheelhouse, or is going to cause more strain and stress on your small business to, hopefully get that benefit. I'm really reminded of the tattoo community right now. It's something I follow a lot on Instagram. And so there's a ton of artists that are doing things like, posting art for sale, or they are raffling off future appointment scheduling, and they're saying like, okay, well, you can book a full day session with me, which can run, depending on the artist, pretty expensive, but you can get, buy into this option for the cost of a raffle ticket. So it's a low ask on the part of your consumer, but a potential for a high payoff, and you're hopefully kind of helping support people that really need it at this time.
Exactly.
All right, that rounds us out. So it's 4:01. I do want to say thank you so much to everybody who stuck with us for the whole hour. Thank you so much to everybody who took time out of your day to spend with PowerToFly and spend with me and Colleen. And absolutely, Colleen, I want to say thank you so much. You've given us a lot of really interesting things to think about, and a lot of really good points for us to take away from today.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks to everyone for joining. I hope to connect with you on the few social media platforms I am on, and I really hope everyone stays safe and well.
Absolutely. I did throw, I'll leave the Zoom link open a little bit longer after I end today's video, so you can go back and get some of those links if you like. I dropped links in there if you want to connect on LinkedIn with either Colleen or myself, as well as where you can connect with Relativity on PowerToFly. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a lovely Wednesday.
Thanks everyone.